Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to the What's Happening Muslim show brought to you by the Islamic Jihads podcast. I'm your host Majid and I'm joined by my co-hosts Rash and Afi. Assalamu alaikum brothers, how you doing?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good, thank you.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Good. How are you?
Yeah, not bad, man. Not bad, alhamdulillah. It's been a while since we've recorded a podcast, and it's definitely been a while since we recorded a What's Happening Muslim show. So it'll be interesting for that. But in regards to everything else, yeah, alhamdulillah, can't complain. People are complaining about the weather though. So that's just the nature of man, isn't it? Either it's too cold or either it's too hot.
Is it a British thing? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know, when you go abroad and stuff, do you hear other people complaining about the weather as much as people over here? Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, when you go, Pakistan, for example, now, it's, if you think it's hot here, it's been like 40 degrees plus for a few months now, right? And whilst I was there earlier in the year, people were saying that it gets hot, but people just get on with life. So you got to think about people are fasting in Ramadan. These same people are going out, bricklayers and your normal type of labor work. They don't get an opportunity to book holidays like we do. You know what I mean? Last 10 days or whatever.
Yeah.
And they just manage, man. It's just you got to just get on with it, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah, in a different type of heat as well. So like you were saying, in places like the Emirates or Saudi, when they're working on these like tall buildings during Ramadan, long days as well, without break, without water and food, and they just get on with it.
Yeah, it's just that's why, alhamdulillah, you just gotta thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the blessings that you have. But again, at least they have a lot of vitamin D, I guess, which is we
need it for our skin color and all of that, innit?
That's it, innit? People complain about vitamin D and stuff, and but alhamdulillah, the last few days, I think we're getting a boost for the rest of the year. And alhamdulillah, I think it is a British thing to talk about the weather, because it seems like we tend to always speak about the weather, but I think this time there's actually a good reason to, because it is really hot. So inshallah,
it's probably more a British thing that they always complain about everything. Expectancy that everything should be all right for them.
Yeah, exactly, man. The privileged nation, isn't it? You know what I mean? But to be honest with you, this is the last thing I'm going to mention about weather, and then we'll get into it, is that, in fact, a lot of places around the world, some places it's either always cold, some places it's either always hot. However, at the end of the day, in the UK, as an example, I'm sure other parts of Europe is like this as well, where, you do tend to get 4 seasons. So, you do see autumn, you do see spring, so at the end of the day, you do get a mix. So people from other countries, to them, they would like that. They don't want it to be hot all the time or cold all the time, but it is what it is, isn't it? People will always complain. But okay, inshallah, let's get into the topic, guys. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we're doing the What's Happening Muslim show again, which was a show which we did a while back, regards to like a roundup of issues that are affecting the ummah, which we will discuss. I'll get your thoughts on. And there's a couple of issues, inshallah ta'ala, we'll bring into this show. And the first one is regarding the events that have been happening in Palestine in the last week or so, and what impact that has on the politics in the region, but also, as a Muslim, as an ummah, as someone who's connected to that land, what impact does it have? Now, for those who don't know, there was like a campaign, an operation against a particular faction, military group called the Islamic Jihad, last week or so, where they were bombed in Gaza, where some of their members, some of their commanders were either arrested or killed in West Bank and so on. And from all of this, what we see is there are some things that we need to take away, because this operation by the Zionist forces, I don't think it's your normal type of operation. I think this is a well planned. It was an organized campaign, and it was designed to achieve certain objectives, which inshallah ta'ala, hopefully we will discuss and get your your views on. But what I will say is, just looking deeper into this, you can see that in fact the group Islamic Jihad, which is actually the second largest militant group within Gaza, you can actually see that certain things happened weeks before, days before, which kind of like lured them into a conflict, whether it was the arrest of their commander in the West Bank called Bassam al-Sadi, or whether it was their incursion in the Jenin refugee camp. And we see that because of this, there was some, there were threats that were issued by the Jenin battalion, which is affiliated to the Al-Quds brigades, which is the military wing of Islamic Jihad. And this was then used as a pretext of a what they call a preemptive strike against the group in Gaza. Now, they obviously did this because there's objectives that they need to achieve in regards to whether it's the upcoming elections and so on. So I don't want to go into it all right now. Rashal, I'll come to you first. What are your thoughts on what happened? Because many Muslims were killed. Let's use the right terminology. Were killed. From our point of view, inshallah, they were shaheed. But what's your thoughts on what happened, and on what the sort of maybe some of the objectives that were designed to be achieved during this operation?
Yeah, Jazakallah. I think we do need to look at it from the political point of view. I think that's most important, especially because, like you say, I mentioned it in my khutbah this week, in that it was exactly a year since there were attacks in Palestine previously as well. And I only realized is because, like you get your 1 year memories come up on Facebook and stuff. It said this time last year you posted this. So it's like, it seemed like almost to the day it was happening again, or almost to the week. So first thing that dawned on me is that I'm worried about kind of getting desensitized to these type of things, because they're happening so regularly. You just sometimes just look at it from the point of view of the bits that are even in the media on the side that we see. For example, we know that Western media doesn't cover it, firstly, and secondly, when it does cover it, it covers it in a completely biased way. And thirdly, when it does cover it, it might show bits of, this person died here, this family died here. So it's just reporting on specific events. It very rarely reports it on the basis of why it's happening. And that's why I think what your question is probably the most important one. As Muslims, rather than, of course, we're going to get emotional. Of course, we're going to see and we can talk about some of the specific examples to highlight just how callous the IDF and the Zionists are. Yeah, it's worth mentioning some examples because the emotional bit is important. But in regards to the political side, I think it's really important for people to realize that our brothers and sisters there who are on the front line are being used as pawns in order to facilitate their political agenda. So like the coalition government that is there, it's fragile. We knew that from when we talked about it maybe a couple of years ago, when that coalition government came in. Initially, we talked about the fact that it's fragile, that there's like Arabs and Jews and stuff all trying to form a government in order to, administer Israel. Yeah. So, but what's important is you have to highlight that there has to always be a security threat to the Jewish or to the Zionist, the Israeli people. If there is no security threat, if there is no threat of, someone's trying to bomb you, someone's trying to kill you, they're throwing rockets at us, then those people don't unite together and therefore don't vote for the relevant parties to continue to protect their security. And what's happening from a political point of view this time is, they're trying to show enough of a threat to keep that coalition together. And those are things you very rarely hear. You won't hear that in the media hardly at all. And what you won't equally hear in the media is what you said. These things are designed. They're designed to get a reaction from the Muslims and as in the Muslims in Gaza, as in, like you say, Islamic Jihad, they're designed to get a reaction from them so that they can then subsequently rally their forces and rally their support in order to instigate certain policies or to keep their governments together. Yeah, so those elements are important because, you know, and the reason why I also say it's important is because as Muslims from the outside, I don't know if you've heard this, sometimes you have some Muslims go, oh, but why are our brothers chucking in rockets? They know those guys have got stronger weapons. They know they're going to shoot us and cause kind of children to die and stuff. So they don't appreciate how these things are instigated. So they start to blame our own brothers, not in a like a, you know, not in an aggressive way, but like in a defeatist way. It's like, oh, just don't do it, because all you're going to do is Israel are going to retaliate and innocent people are going to die. Why are they shooting rockets? But they never look at it from the political point of view. They never look at what these plans Israel are carrying out. They never look at the fact that, you know, they're targeting civilians intentionally and covering these things up. So I think looking at the political side of it and looking at why they instigate these things at certain specific times prior to elections, you know, with Netanyahu trying to get back into a leadership position, they're doing it very intentionally at a specific time, not just randomly. And I think as Muslims, if we don't realize that, we'll just go, oh, that's another attack in Gaza. It must just be, you know, the Jews being Jews, you know, the Zionists being Zionists. So, okay, let's go and send some aid. Let's help them. Let's just, you know, go back to those same actions. And we fall away from understanding the political side.
Yeah. No, definitely, bro. Definitely. I mean, just in regards to what you mentioned about some of the views of Muslims when they try to, I would say they oversimplify the situation, and it's just logic that's being used where, you know, if they don't attack, then the Zionists wouldn't attack back. But you know, you've taken the whole situation out of context here in regards to, well, these are people who are occupied.
Exactly.
These are people who are colonized, and the occupiers, the colonizers are there. So are they going? And it's not like the Zionists colonized it once in 1947 and it stopped. They're still doing it, you know, up until this day. They're building settlements, they're destroying houses and so on. So it's like just that logic. I mean, I know what you're saying is it's from a good place. It's not a negative place.
Yeah, they're not saying like, oh, we shouldn't, you know, we shouldn't fight back, but they're just kind of saying, oh, it's almost like, what's the point? Without realizing that there's ethnic cleansing going on here. The strategic targeted areas where the bombings are happening are in places where they know that if they keep doing it, like, you know, in Jordan border and things like that, then people are going to, at some point in time, they're going to go, you know what? I'm not going to stick around here with my family. I'm just going to chip because, look, I can't take this anymore. And if it was us, we probably think like that as well. But alhamdulillah, look at the iman of some of these brothers and sisters. They're losing their children, like that sister who was saying, look, my son's died shaheed. And she was, you know, the way she reacted. You know, we can't even contemplate reacting like that. We'd be broken. Yet they're reacting in a way of pride for the shaheed that is dying on the front line. So, but we need to understand the political bit because they are trying to ethnically cleanse and clear the place of Muslims. And it's very, very strategic.
Yeah. And before I come to you, Afi, just one thing I want to point out as well on from what Rash said is that, you know, at this moment in time, as Muslims, what we have to understand is, and what the listeners and people watching this have to understand is that what happened a week ago, in reality, it was purely internal politics by the Zionist forces.
Yeah.
But at what cost? This is what we have to think about, that you know, the Muslims at this moment in time, our lives are, you know, viewed as being just cannon fodder, just for political gain. So we can see that, you know, since what's happened, since this Operation Breaking Dawn, we can see that, you know, Yair Lapid, the Prime Minister, this guy, you know, he's in the polls, you know, he's had a massive boost because, like you mentioned, one of the main issues that affects the people that live in this occupied land in this illegal entity is their security. So what if we look at what happened in, with this operation Breaking Dawn, and other conflicts that we've seen last year, like you mentioned, and ones before, some things do stand out. For example, they only targeted Islamic Jihad. Okay. Secondly, this operation lasted 3 days. And thirdly, and very important point, is there's no casualties on the Israeli side. Okay, so Yair Lapid, he's come in, and obviously we know that he is seen as a more of a moderate element. But remember, he's still got to win over that far right element, right? He hasn't got really any military background as such. So this operation happens, and they target the smaller group within Gaza, and we'll come on to Hamas afterwards. There is some things we need to speak about Hamas, but here they targeted the smallest faction, and on top of that, they're showing how the Iron Dome system, I think they said something like 95% of the rockets, the missiles that were thrown towards Palestine, occupied Palestine, how they were taken out. So what this has shown is basically that this was a successful military operation. So this guy, now we know that Netanyahu is making a comeback. We know the Americans don't want Netanyahu to be back in as prime minister. So just think about this now. This small operation, from their point of view, which cost many, many Muslim lives, okay, is geared
19 children.
19 children is geared towards the elections in November, where they need this guy to give this guy a boost, give Bennett a boost, give Benny Gantz a boost before the elections. That's what Muslims have to understand here now, that this is the scenario. These are the political games that are being played. Afi, bro, sorry. Over to you.
No, Jazakallah khair, and not to repeat much of what you guys have said. This isn't new, right? This tactic is not new. All right, the style might be different, the targeting might be different, but whenever there's an election coming up, security is the issue that they use to try and sway public opinion. Netanyahu did it, Sharon did it, Bennett tried it. Everyone's going to do it. So I don't want to touch on that, because it seems that we have these podcasts all the time whenever something happens, just trying to evoke that thinking in the Muslims. But this situation carries on. I just want to touch on something that Rash said, where people criticize some of the Muslims within Palestine, saying, look, you're the one who are creating or causing this backlash. And in the past, I might have thought of that as well. But my thinking now is, alhamdulillah for those people in Palestine, because if it hadn't been for them, occupation would have ended a long time ago, and it would have become legitimization of the illegal occupying state. So alhamdulillah, and may Allah be pleased with our brothers and sisters in Palestine who have resisted for so long, so that at least in the minds of the rest of us who have, let's be honest, let the Muslims of Palestine down, that they've, at least we're still seeing it as occupation rather than this legitimate state. And it just so happens that the third holiest mosque is there, because let's be honest, that's what the agenda is. And ever since they took over the land, the non-Muslims took over the land, it hasn't been a case of, let's come and find a compromise and live in peace. It has been a systematic effort to remove Palestine from the face of the earth, and establish this illegitimate state within the Middle East, and over time it'll become accepted. And in the past, it was done with the acceptance of the regimes in the Muslim world, where they just didn't do anything about it and just control their people and paid a bit of lip service. But now it's being accelerated greater, hence why you're seeing a more strategic use of these events. Why are they targeting the Jordanian border? Because naturally they want people to move into Jordan and into this new land that they want to call Palestine. And all of this can't happen without the regimes who we know are treacherous in the Muslim world, who are no longer quiet, but actively aiding it. They're part of the plan now. They are supporting, they're creating the plan, working with America and the Jewish entity to actually create this alternative vision for the Muslims of Palestine. And then by endorsing it themselves, they're keeping it quiet. So the Muslims in Palestine are going to be even more isolated. So as an ummah, we need to ask ourselves, what is it that we need to get out from this situation that's ongoing? What is it? Let's go back to basics. What is it? And then let's put our effort and support behind it, because at the moment it's purely emotional, and it's not a bad feeling to have, where you're seeing your Muslim brothers and sisters being targeted and butchered and killed, ethnic cleansing like Rash is talking about. But these situations, they're not even cyclic, they're constant. So we probably need to go back to basics a bit and say, what is it that we need to get out of this situation, and what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable, and what is it that we support then?
Yeah, no, of course, bro. And like you said, these things are not new, and they will continue to happen, because as Muslims, I think every Muslim in the world has a connection to that land, and I think they know why, because it's Masjid al-Aqsa and so on. And I think where we see in the Ummah is there are some people who hold the view correctly that every inch of that land is Muslim land, and it has to be cleansed. It has to be cleansed, and the inhabitants return to their homes and so on. This is Muslim land, and to do this, the reality is that we see that the Zionist entity, they look at what they did in 1947 in regards to physically how they using military means, how they took over that area. Okay, obviously the Muslims wouldn't do what they did in places like, I think it's Deir Yassin and so on. However, for us to think as Muslims that this situation can be resolved without physical means, this is naive at best. It's not going to happen. But also you have, I think, people in the Ummah who are a bit pragmatic, who then look at the situation and say, well, look, it's got to be a two-state solution. We've got to look to the UN and so on. And I think that's something which, has, the idea of UN has, fallen flat on its face, because we see that at every stage, their resolutions have been violated by the usurping entity, right? And nothing's happened. In fact, we see that, their settlements grow, the persecution of the Muslims continue. And in fact, in reality, these type of resolutions are actually designed to pacify the Muslims to not actually do anything, because they think that some world body is going to do it for them. But at the same time, whilst they're not doing anything, the other side is taking full advantage of it. And this is not a coincidence. This is the way it's been designed. So, I mean, going back to the issue, bro, I mean, of what your question is, I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, but as Muslims, I think, we have to understand that the problem is to do with the fact that it's a military problem. And one of the factors, and I think would be the key factor, is the collaborating rulers that are in that area. If it wasn't for them, then there's no chance that this entity would even be there today. Yeah. Okay.
Just to add, I think sometimes it may sound like we're just targeting the Arab rulers. It's not just the collaborating rulers in that area. It's all of them. Anyone who's
more so in that area, though. More so in the area.
No. I disagree, because I think as Muslim rulers, right, Muslim countries, right, any Muslim can't have a endorsing stance towards any alternate, any solution which isn't the complete liberation of our Muslim lands, right? And we know that the Muslims in all of these countries are pro the Ummah. They want what's best for the Ummah, and they hold that link to Islam. So the rulers within that area, they're directly supporting what the Jewish entity is doing.
Of course.
The ones who are, I agree with you, and I know that's what you meant. The ones who are not in that area are still supporting his existence and the notion of what is planned, by either remaining silent or coming up with some compromises, which is, all right, give the Palestinians a state and then we'll recognize you. And we know what giving a Palestinians a state means. Even the Palestinians know what giving them a state means, but they reject it. So I think it's, and sometimes, this gives the likes of Erdogan, a get out of jail card, because people are focusing on the obvious actions, and the clear actions are being carried out about Saudi, UAE, Qatar, etc. And the likes of Erdogan and the people in Pakistan get let off lightly, whereas actually they're all in the same boat here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I want to mention, I mean, it actually links into the Hamas when we're talking about these collaborating rulers. But Rash, you wanted to make a point, so I'll come to you first, and then maybe, or even actually after you made your point, whether, a question for you is in all this, this situation happened, for 3 days, a week ago or so, we see that Hamas, even though they are pledged to support the Islamic Jihad group, they didn't do this. Maybe you have any thoughts on this, but anyway, carry on your first point, and if you want to come to that.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that I think, without sounding like a broken record, because like you say, we've had these podcasts on this topic a number of times. Every time these attacks happen every couple of years, or Afi's right, it's not every couple of years, it's all the time. But what I mean is when it's escalated every year or a certain time or Ramadan for specific objectives, then we might have a podcast where we discuss it. And I think even the people on the ground I'd like to think the majority of them now realize that this two-state solution thing is absolute bogus. Yeah, I think more and more, there was more people in the past that used to turn around and go, oh yeah, we need to wait for this two-state solution. But I think over the years, especially, how like you have the most recently, these Abraham Accords, and then the previously Camp David Accords, and previously, because every time we've had them, and I think, alhamdulillah, certain brothers and people have done good jobs of going, look, each time one of those agreements have been made, we've actually lost more land. And each time one of these agreements have been made, we've actually got to a worse situation than we were before. And each time any of these agreements have been made, Israel themselves turn around and go, no, look what we're going to continue to be on the offensive and take more land and attack more and kill more innocent people. So hopefully more people are realizing that two-state solution is not a solution, and should also be realizing that actually the only solution is the Muslim armies going in and liberating Palestine. But I think, to their credit, or even to give them the benefit of the doubt, I think the issue is most people just can't see how it will happen because of the leaders that are there at the moment. However, I don't think that's a detriment to them. That's them going, at least they realize that's the solution, and they need to start thinking about how do we facilitate that, and how do we make sure we keep discussing this topic so that future generations are going to be aware that this is where the problem is. If you don't know the problem, you're not going to know how to solve it. That's the bottom line. And in regards to your question about Hamas, I think that I briefly touched on it, although I didn't mention them specifically. I think the fact that our brothers are being played as pawns there is the issue is, and I think just looking at it logically, if you're oppressed, and then someone comes along and says, here's some weapons, or we're going to support you with weapons, and we're going to support you with communications. And, like modern wars are not just on a horse with a gun or a knife and a bow and arrow. Yeah, there's communications and all of these things. If the likes of, say, for example, the Qataris are giving you weapons and supporting you, then there's more chance that you're going to do what they advise you to do. They're giving you weapons. But the problem we've got is these rulers and these Arab nations, as whatever their feeling are towards Palestine and whatever their feelings are towards Israel, they're instigating activities that are still facilitating Israel, and what their agenda is. Like this 3-day onslaught, like you said, quite clearly has facilitated their elections and getting support for the coalition. So the fact that Hamas didn't get involved when they said they would get involved, what does that tell you? That tells you that there are powers there that are instigating these activities, and our brothers on the front line, they are getting played. And our responsibility, and just because we're out here in the West, that doesn't mean that we don't come across Palestinians. That doesn't mean that we don't come across Arabs and Jordanians and people who have links to those people. We need to make sure that our brothers and sisters don't continue to be used as political pawns in the games that these Arab nations and Israel and America and all of these people are playing. I think that's what's happening, and that's why when we expect them to carry out certain actions without blaming them, sometimes they don't, because there's ulterior motives and people pulling the strings. That's my personal opinion. I might be wrong.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, bro, because it's when you become dependent on someone. I mean, just look out, for example, in Syria, when a lot of the fighting groups, they were dependent on the Saudis and the UAE and the Qataris. So, their finance, their weapons, everything is coming from them, and they can turn off that tap.
Exactly.
But this is why I'm saying that my observation is that this operation was designed in a way where it had to achieve the objective, which to show this Yair Lapid guy in good light. Okay, but at the same time, and I'm not saying this in a negative way against Hamas, for example. But what I'm saying is the fact that the collaborators made sure everything was in check before this happened, because the outcome had to be specific. So what we see is that because what they said is that when the Zionist force started to attack Gaza, they're saying that this was like preemptive, it was like spontaneous, right? However, the Egyptians have said that we were notified about this a week ago, so we know that they knew. We know Egypt and Qatar, the fact that they have their Hamas has their links with these governments, okay, and they rely on them and so on and so forth, right? So what we see is the fact that Hamas could not get involved in this operation for the outcome to be a quick one, because compared to the Islamic Jihad, compared to Hamas, when it comes to weapons and stuff, they're like, there's a massive difference. We saw what happened last year.
Yeah,
the amount of rockets that were fired in, right? So we see that with Hamas not being involved, whether they being pragmatic or whatever reason it is, or whether they were advised to stay away from this, from the people like from the governments of Qatar or Egypt, what we see is the fact that they know that there were domestic political agendas that were being sought in that land. However, your brothers are being attacked.
Exactly.
So whether you don't think it's the right moment or you're still rebuilding and whatnot, their response should have been different. Okay, in my opinion. Okay, I'm not slating them. I'm not saying anything negative.
No, I think we can be critical about people's decision making, and we should be, because there might be the right actions, but what you're trying to also say, and I understand this, and it's correct, is that they're in a place where, because they're dependent, and that's what my point as well was, because they're dependent on these nations, those nations can make certain, like say, pull the strings in a certain way that actually facilitates our enemies, and we just become political pawns in that game. So for that reason, especially as our brothers are on the front line, the level of criticism has to be more a level of advice. But it's all about making sure that we don't keep falling into these traps. But until, the whole ummah is not more politically clued up and these leaders are not completely replaced, then unfortunately it's just going to keep happening, isn't it? That's the sad reality.
Yeah. I mean, and what I want to add as well is that, if you read some of the papers, the way they made it out was that the Zionist entity, it was a gamble for them. It was a calculated gamble that Hamas weren't going to get involved. But what I am trying to tell people who are listening, who are watching this wasn't a gamble. And it goes back to Afi's points about the collaborating rulers. They have everything in their control in regards to what these factions can do, or rein them in when they do, go out of line for their agenda. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is, because the reality of Gaza is that it's an open prison.
Exactly. Just take an example. The Israel was so confident that, remember one of the, I think I shared it on my Instagram, there was those children that went out to the graveyard of their grandfather. They're like 4 children. Remember, and they used to go to that graveyard nearly every day. Yeah. So it's 4 children. I think actually maybe 5 children, because 4 of them died. And Israel directly, remember, look, yes, you can do indiscriminate bombing, but when it's targeted, you can see. So the Israeli army tried to on their Instagram on their Twitter and go, oh, look how good we are. We saw a child walking past this place, so we didn't bomb it. Yeah, all that bullshit. And then at the same time, there's this graveyard where these 4 children or these 5 children are there. They targeted that graveyard. That's supposed to be like a safe space for them. Those children go there most days, and they were just, those 5 children, they targeted it and killed them all in a graveyard. So what's that all about? But they were arrogant enough to be able to do that, knowing that the retaliation was going to be limited to, like you say, Islamic Jihad, because the playbook has been set in order to achieve a specific objective, and that's what just makes it even more sickening, really.
I mean, even the fact that I mean, I know it happens probably every week that the hordes of the settlers sort of raided Masjid al-Aqsa, and if you remember from last year when I think it's the Al-Quds Sword campaign, one of the reasons why Hamas was involved was because of the Masjid al-Aqsa was desecrated. It happened again. But again, the response was different. So I mean, the point here, I think what you make a really good, valid point, Rash. It's about just criticism. It's about advice. But the point I'm saying is that what we are seeing. The main point I would take away from this is that, look, what's happened in the last week, it's for the internal political agenda of what's happening within the Zionist area, the land. However, what we need to think about as Muslims is that, I mean, to be honest with you, I wasn't even aware about this example that you gave about these 4 children, that our children, our mothers, our fathers, our lives don't have any value, right? And can be used just as political pawns whenever needed to. And who is actually part of what's happening, as Afi pointed, is those rulers. So as Muslims, we shouldn't have any expectations on these people. And the reality is that this land is only going to be liberated when those rulers are actually removed. And the forces, the resources of that land are in the right hands. I mean, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, he had to remove the dead wood in order to unify the Ummah. Okay, and if you look at it, and if you study history and you look at the 100 years of the Crusader kingdoms, a lot of the reasons why it even continued for 100 years was not just because of kind of disunity in the Ummah, but because the sort of like areas, the wilayas, whatever you want to call them, around Palestine, some of them had deals with the Crusaders. They had like trade deals and all sorts. It's no different. What did Salahuddin al-Ayyubi have to do? He had to remove them. Unify the resources of the Ummah, and he was able to do what he did. And I think this is an important point. Afi, I feel you want to say something, bro.
No, I just on what you're saying then, that it's got to be the armies who do it. And in recent years, I can only think of one time when the plans of the Jewish state has been affected by the Muslims, and that was last year. Because last year was the first time I've ever heard Muslims not talk about petitions, not talk about funding, not talking about boycotting, but urging the armies to go and liberate, go and help our brothers and sisters. And you could see how very quickly a certain set of actions took place to quell the people and to appease them, to calm that resistance and that notion by the Muslims. Which just goes to show that actually, if the Muslims themselves turn on the leaders and demand that this is what needs to happen, then either they're going to try and quell the situation to quell your emotions, or they've got to respond because they realize that it's the people in these countries who are keeping them in power. And this is why that momentum that's been had seems to have calmed down a bit, because now isolated incidences, the media is trying to keep it quiet. And they're trying to limit that, oh yeah, look, we're targeting Islamic Jihad because a lot of people are familiar with Hamas and they're seeing them as the resistance, and they may not be so aware of Islamic Jihad. But the fact is that when Muslims turned to the real solution and started calling for it, we saw another impact. And this highlights even more that, back down to what Rash was saying, people seeing the problem now, they're seeing the solution, just connect the two constantly and don't be fooled.
And you can add another factor to that because of the Ukraine-Russia war this time, you can see the direct comparison between how the media covers the Ukrainian resistance versus the Muslim resistance. Look at how they've been able to completely indoctrinate their masses to, fall in love with the Ukrainians such that they want them to come over here and live in their houses, and their flags are still everywhere because of the reporting. This is how powerful media is. So they go into their houses, they speak to their mothers who have lost children, or the children who have lost a parent. They bring out that raw emotion and they plaster it over the news and over all the programs, and suddenly the people find a connection with them. Yet when it's the Muslims, it's the complete opposite. It's like, oh yeah, it's complicated, it's not an illegal state, blah blah blah, and they're trying to paint it in a completely different way. They just expose it's not hypocrisy from their point of view, because we know they have hatred for Muslims, but on a kind of a level playing field, is pure outright hypocrisy. On top of the fact that, I don't know if you saw the Ukrainian, I think he was the ambassador to Israel, he came out and showed solidarity towards the Israelis. So, and this is a time where children, you bloody Israelis, no one flipping died. 19 at least children die from the bombings, and you're showing solidarity to the flipping Israelis. What kind of joke is that at a time when the world is trying to show solidarity to you? It just goes to prove that the pure way they instigate and kind of change people's opinion. Sorry, go on, Afi.
Sorry, can I just add to that? And I think when people try to highlight that hypocrisy, what was the response of the governments and the politicians? Oh, these ain't no backward Arabs, these ain't backward Muslims,
Exactly.
These are people from the desert, these
Exactly.
are our own blonde-haired, white-skinned people, and their
racism is just
totally
so blatant.
Read between the lines. What is it? What makes Muslims different? So it's they're never going to endorse or support our cause. And that made it clear. And I think you're right. Alhamdulillah, people did start to see that, wait a minute, there's something different here. Their actions do not match their words.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly, man. Exactly. There's one last thing I want to kind of, another kind of political dimension I want to add to this. Just get your thoughts on it, and then we could probably move on to the next topic. Is also the fact that it's been widely reported about the links between Islamic Jihad and Iran, as an example, right? And Benny Gantz, the defense minister, he's quoted as saying, on the strategic level, Israel will continue to work with our partners in facing Iranian aggression. And he was talking about Palestinian jihad, the fact that Iran gives them millions, right? Which harms security and stability everywhere, from the Israel-Gaza border to the Mediterranean Sea, to the Gulf and beyond. And the reason why I'm bringing this is it may be a side point, but that obviously we know through the Abrahamic Accords, we know with this idea that's being floated around about this, Arab-Israeli NATO, in that with the GCC countries and so on. And this is just maybe something adding to it as well, the fact that, it kind of made things okay because these guys are linked to Iran. And actually, when it comes to Iran, all the Muslim countries in the region have a common agenda against Iran. Okay, further solidify this partnership that with the Americans are trying to build there between the Arab nations and the illegal entity known as Israel. So I mean, I don't know if you got any thoughts on that. It was just a side point I thought I'd mention.
So I don't know too much about that. Does that mean there's a bit of a conflict between Hamas and Islamic Jihad? Because if Hamas is more kind of Qatar funded and or supported, and then Islamic Jihad is more Iranian supported, would there be a clash there?
Hamas says that it doesn't have a clash. I mean, even in the last few days, Hamas have come out and said, because I think a lot of people were like, wait a minute, these guys are getting bombed. How come you're not doing anything?
Yeah.
They're like, you got some issues with each other, right? And Hamas came, spokesman Hamas came out and he said, no, we've got a. Actually, what he said was quite strange. He said, we've got other Islamic groups, smaller groups. We've even got communist groups. But we're all working together against a common agenda, which is to to fight the usurping entity. So in reality,
I think you're going to get this. I think my opinion on it would be, we saw what happened in Syria, isn't it? You get different actors, state actors, trying to influence things in a certain way, whether it be for pure, like for Islamic purposes, or whether it be like we saw with Iraq and stuff like that, whether it be for some kind of more national interests, like with Turkey and the Kurds and things like that. We sometimes see state actors get involved in clashes that might happen around their borders and things like that. So I'm not entirely sure, to be fair, but I think there's that element of, keeping that interest in place. And that helps, again, it helps the Israelis, isn't it? Because they've always been anti-Iran. So that makes it easier for them to say to their people, oh, this is an Iran-backed attack on us, therefore we have to retaliate. So there must have been that element of it as well.
Yeah, exactly, man. I just thought that was another kind of like political angle as well.
Interesting.
Worth adding. But inshallah, guys, let's move on to the next topic of discussion, and this is to do with the author Salman Rushdie. Many of us have been aware of this guy for many decades now. Okay. Anyway, what happened was, a few days ago, I think it was on Friday, he was stabbed in the neck and abdomen when he was just about to give a lecture in Western New York. And at the moment, the police who have arrested the guy who carried out the attack, they don't know what the motive is. But just for people who don't know who Salman Rushdie is, he is the author of the book The Satanic Verses, which he published in 1988. And this book, at the time, Muslims saw this as being an insult and blasphemous against the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we've seen in 1989 that Ayatollah Khomeini, he issued a fatwa calling for Rushdie's death. Actually, even the people who were part of the publication were seen as were under this fatwa. And we even see that there was a Japanese translator who translated the book into Japanese. He was killed many years ago, and also an Italian translator was attacked. Anyway, so what we see is that this fatwa has been looming on this guy's head for many decades, and whether this is the reason why he was attacked or not, Allahu Alam, I'm sure we'll find out soon enough. But I've got my thoughts on this because this is something which we grew up at a time when when Islam was making a comeback, when people were getting a bit more Islamic, and this was one of the aspects which really kind of motivated people, and it also showed a level of ummah as well, because this wasn't even though Ayatollah Khomeini was an Iranian and he was Shia, what we see is that actually, I think it's funny to think though, at that time I think every Muslim kind of felt like that fatwa was binding on them. You know what I mean? And no one argued about that. I mean, you saw demonstrations which were carried out by Sunnis, whoever, and they were carrying Ayatollah Khomeini's pictures. So, but anyway, I'll add my thoughts in probably afterwards. But Afi, just get your thoughts on this story, bro.
Yeah, it's each time Salman Rushdie is mentioned, innit? You remember, you think back to those protests and the burning books that we attended when we were like, we would have been about 10 years old, innit? Something like that. Yeah, about 11 years old.
12. I don't want to get my age away though, but
and yeah, I was just a bit younger. So I think that hatred for him from that generation is there. But this is I think from what I was if I remember correctly, they were saying this guy who stabbed him was pretty young. So
he's born 10 years after the book was published.
He would have been born 10 years after the book was written. So you're talking someone in their 20s. So whenever Salman Rushdie is being mentioned, they always talk about him in connection with satanic verses. And I think the positive that I would draw from it is that at least the Muslims out there have this strong emotional attachment, right, to Islam. the honor of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. We started with the cartoons, etc. That if anyone insults or attacks the honor of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam or Islam, they feel it's an obligation to defend them, right? So that's a positive. The danger becomes when, you know, these emotions arise and we don't channel them with the correct thinking. Because then that makes you susceptible to your emotions, and, you know, you'll just carry out an action or I will face the consequences without thinking actually what's going to happen as a result of this. So yeah, there's been a lot of rejoice, and I think where Muslims need to be a bit more smart about this is that, and I've just been following some of these discussions online, is the media is portraying this attack against freedom.
Yeah.
And those who are advocating freedom of expression, which doesn't even exist, but they claim that it does. And anyone who justifies what happened to Rushdie is again seen as violating this or being anti it, again bringing spotlight onto Muslims. Some people online have been posting comments to that effect, and then when the non-Muslims start posing questions back saying, oh, religion is made up, and anything that happens in the name of religion is bad, and, you know, what kind of prophet have you got who is advocating that this is the kind of actions you take, the attack on Muhammad ﷺ is occurring far greater than someone who just wrote a book that they claim was fictional anyway, right? But the attack on Muhammad ﷺ is greater than a book because it's constant and it's attacking the very foundations of our belief. So if you, and this is where I would just urge Muslims again, we have got a belief which we can prove is correct. No one ever questions the foundations of what our belief is built upon, whether it's correct or incorrect, because they know we can win the argument. So instead they attack the branches of our belief, because they know that the Muslims don't have the understanding on how these branches emanate from the seed and the roots and are actually correct. And therefore we fall short because we just go back, and they were scared to defend Islam when Islam is being attacked. So, you know, that's been an observation, and people won't try it with the likes of us because they know actually we'll give it back and we'll take it to the very foundation of what this argument is built upon. Let's establish whose criteria is correct, and therefore, you know, the non-Muslims who just play good lip service and follow the media narrative will go back into their kennels and their corners, right? So it's a reminder for Muslims, actually, you know what, we've got the truth here. We shouldn't be scared to defend the truth, but in order to do that, we need to understand what gives Islam that vitality that we can take on the world as we did in the past, and really understand that.
Yeah. No, I think you made some valid points there, bro. And just one thing that I was thinking was that, you know, when this book came out in '89, and I remember as a kid, is, you know, I'll be straight with you, is like at that time, I mean, it might sound a bit, I don't know if it sounds weird or whatever, but at that time, it's like not you, because I don't want to generalize it, but I definitely had thoughts on like being the hero who's going to deal with this guy. I'll be straight with you, right? And now thinking about it, it's kind of scary because I was pretty young then, but nevertheless, you know, I felt like, you know, because the person who's going to deal with this guy, he was going to be, you know, added to the legacy,
legendary
right?
status. Yeah.
But now just thinking about what you're saying, Afi, is look how times have moved on. I mean, it might be a side thing, and Rush definitely come in with the initial point I think you're going to make. But in 1989, this guy wrote a fictional book which was attacking Islam and the Prophet ﷺ. And this guy had a fatwa on his name. Look at the stuff that's happening today, man.
Today, exactly.
Look at the stuff that's happening. Look at the stuff today, which has become normal. Normalized, the attack on Islam, the attack on our Prophet ﷺ, on his life, on
it's not a side point, bro. I think that's a key point. I think the fact that where we are as an ummah now, sadly, even though we can say that yes, we are becoming more, you know, we're trying to come closer to Islam, understand it more. Hopefully, you know, we're seeing more people, you know, carrying out the sunnah. You're seeing maybe more people covering. So there's positive, no doubt. But you're right to highlight that issue. That how is it that all the stuff that's happening now, and all those years ago there was a fatwa out against this person. I think sometimes it's easy, isn't it, that when it's an individual, it's easy to go, oh, it's that individual who is attacking Islam, less, like the Charlie Hebdo thing and things like that. So it becomes quite easy to target an individual, whereas when there's whole states like the whole state of America or whatever, attacking Islam, or these CVE policies or prevent policies, it's a bit more difficult to go, look, we need to be against them because it's a whole strategic movement and policy rather than an individual. In regards to what has happened, a couple of thoughts really. Firstly, is it any surprise that this has got more coverage than even what's happening in Palestine? What state of affairs is this guy getting stabbed is more of an issue than 19 children being bombed indiscriminately, their body parts being scattered everywhere, and brothers and sisters being killed? What should be in the media more? That's my first observation, and we know why. Islamically, we're against vigilantism. That's not something we advocate, is it? This whole idea that you just go and you carry out as an individual these kind of actions, especially when the harm that can come from it can potentially be worse than the action. Yeah. So what I mean by that is, like, look what. I find it a bit strange that someone so young was willing to go and do something like this after all these years. If someone did it back then, completely understandable. All of these years later to do it almost seems a bit instigated in a way that, look what's happened off the back of it. Everybody's going, oh, look at, this is the so-called religion of peace. Look at, you can't even say something negatively about them. But remember, this satanic verses, it wasn't just like, just talking a little bit about, trying to intellectually debate with Islam. It was attacking Islam. It's derogatory, it's blasphemous, all of these things. And for them, that's freedom of expression. Bollocks, basically, yeah. Yet at the end of the day, look, they've tried to highlight this as some kind of, that kind of action in the Western world. It's not, it shouldn't happen, should it? Someone going at a book thing, going and stabbing someone. But there's far, far, far more things that are happening in the world, and it just goes to prove. I think it was instigated just to serve an agenda. And they're pushing that agenda, and all the mainstream media are talking about it. And especially on social media, you get a lot of the people who might have even positively tried to speak, come to Islam. They see things like this and go, do I want to look into Islam? Is this how they treat people? So I think potentially there's an agenda behind it. I can't prove that, but it just comes across that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's what Afi's saying also, and built on what you're saying, Rash. Islam is a belief that you arrive at intellectually. So you look at the time of the Messenger Sallallahu, and actually, let's just look at the Quran. The Quran itself, is appealing to one's mind, to its senses, is intellectually building a case.
Yeah.
Right. And this is how Islam spread. But what happens is, what something like this can do is try to show that Muslims, they're just barbaric.
Yeah.
They just, you can't discuss with them. You can't have an intellectual discussion. This is what they will do. And
that was kind of my reason for saying that the harm that comes from something like this, especially after all these years, it just seems like, okay, we're not going to, no one's going to shed any tears, and no one's going to, lose any sleep over as a Muslim over this guy getting, stabbed, but at the end of the day, there seems like there's a genuine, the harm that comes from someone doing something like this is something that they wanted to happen. And that's what in the back of my mind, that's what I'm thinking. Wait there a minute. It's a bit convenient.
But then again, I mean, it could be convenient, but it's one of those, and it's like maybe the guy who did it, maybe his father told him,
Maybe.
there was this guy who wrote this, and like passed on the message. You know what I mean?
Yeah, or maybe he read it and realized this is disgusting. How can someone say stuff like this about Islam, about the Quran, about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So yeah, no doubt he could have just been triggered. So absolutely, but it just seems that the narrative that's being played out now, these things aren't always a coincidence.
Yeah, sure. No, exactly. After you were gonna say something, bro.
No, and I think these attacks on the sanctity of Islam, on the Prophet Sallam, on his family, etc. These are constant, right? And they're always going to happen. And like I said, we are not, the solution from Islam was never vigilantism, right? So we got to ask ourselves, right, that these are constantly happening. We're exposed to them all the time. The people who then get attacked, who are the ones who insulted Islam, are turned into martyrs, they're turned into heroes, they embolden others, and therefore this tide against Islam just gets more and more and more and more, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, we got to be careful, right? That we don't insult other religions, because then they're going to insult Islam back, right? And they insult Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we need to be careful of our actions and the consequences it's going to have. The emotion from the Muslims, very, very good. Alhamdulillah, it's a good place to be. However, what we as Muslims need to think about is, okay, how do we prevent this from happening and strike fear in the non-Muslims to not even think about doing it again? 100%. And the examples that you can see in the past from the likes of Abdul Hamid, may Allah be pleased with him, and from other great leaders before them, that when Islam was established as a power on the international stage, just the mere response, what you're doing, if you're doing this, go ahead, just be prepared for the consequences, was enough to strike fear in these people not to do it. And that's where we need to get to. That's that place of unity as Muslims with true leadership based upon Islam will then strike fear in anyone. Not only strike fear, but then the people will see the true essence of Islam and embrace it like they did in the past as well. But it will prevent these issues from happening, and therefore, will be appeased. This isn't the way to go about it. In fact, emboldens and empowers people to, in fact, do more. Because we saw it with the cartoons. When we reacted as an ummah the way we did, what happened? More and more cartoons came out. More and more people felt brave to burn the Quran in public, which just gets a greater reaction from us. And then it becomes a cycle, right? Which just gets worse and worse each time as the cycle goes around. So yeah.
There's a big difference between reacting on emotion and reacting on intellect. If we were a tribe without an intellectual ideology that is more powerful than everything in the world, then those are the people who are like barbaric and just go around going, well, our idea is weaker, but we've got a strong, we'll just live by and die by the sword kind of attitude. No, Islam, we know we can prove it as the truth. We know that it is an idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created for mankind. So why don't we battle other ideas via ideas? No doubt force is required at the right time, but like you're saying, I completely agree with Afi. What ends up happening is that these kind of actions just make the situation worse. But at the end of the day, he got what he deserved.
No, he did.
And I think as for one of the final thoughts in regards to this topic from myself is the fact that these attacks are always going to happen, and you can't stop them in that respect. Okay, as in, like, just the fact that people don't believe in the Prophet Sallam, in a way is saying he's a liar just by you not accepting he was a prophet. So that's that's an insult. However, I think what's important is that as Muslims, when they are attacking Islam by mocking it, when they're attacking our Messenger Islam by mocking it, they are responding emotionally. We have to always respond intellectually, in the sense, like, the fact that they just mock and don't put up an intellectual challenge means they have nothing. So as Muslims, for myself, for you guys, for people listening, what we should do is work on ourselves in respect to intellectually be proven that Islam is the truth, be intellectually proven that the Quran is the speech of Allah, and actually be confident that you can intellectually protect Islam from intellectually as the truth. Emotionally, dogs will always bark, and some of them get put down. Okay, but that's just, they're just going to keep on barking, isn't it?
Yeah, just look at the method of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he was in Mecca, and he didn't have a state, and he wasn't, an organized entity with an army. The people attacked him. They attacked the Sahaba. They were killing the best of Sahaba. They were killing them and abusing them and all of these things. Yeah, and they were probably saying things, against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, against the Prophet. We know they were. Yeah. So was the answer then vigilantism? It wasn't. The answer was continue to preach that Islam is the truth and how it is the truth. Continue to work towards creating an entity where you can then protect your society, your civilization, your people, and then protect from, physically. So there's a methodology there that's also described to us. I think when you just think emotionally, you don't then consider what Islam expects of you in this kind of situation. And then it's short-termism is a little bit as well. You don't sometimes see the consequences of going, I'm just going to react with emotion, and then whatever happens. And that's a very shallow way of thinking.
Yeah, no, exactly, bro. Exactly. One thing I will just add though, we were talking about, because you were talking about the, this seeming like too much of a coincidence and stuff.
Yeah.
But there is another, I don't know, conspiracy theory, if you want to call it that, because a lot of this has put attention to Iran.
Yes.
How are people in Iran reacting?
Mm.
Because the fatwa came from there, remember?
Yeah.
So
and they're highlighting that. Why haven't they rescinded this fatwa from all of that time ago? Why is it still free? So they're trying to link it back to say that means if anybody carries out this action, they're still going to get the reward from Iran. So yeah, in politics, things aren't generally a coincidence.
That's right. But there's a quote by Mohammed Marandi. He's an advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiating team, right? And what he said was, I will not shed tears for someone who spread hatred against Islam and Muslims for years. But is it a coincidence that just when we are on the verge of revitalizing the nuclear agreement, America makes claims about an attempted assassination of Bolton, and then this happens? So, you know what I mean? Throw that and take that as you will. But
that's what I mean. And we've seen loads of times some of the attacks, the so-called terrorist attacks that we see are usually by young people who have been, certain situation, we hear about the FBI doing it, the CIA doing it. They use people, even, especially, and I'm not saying people who are insincere, but, in difficult situations, they brainwash them and get them to do things. And it always seems to serve a political agenda. So,
bro, it wouldn't be difficult. I mean, people have known the guy's going to come to that venue months ahead. You pick up someone who's probably lost some families in some war or some, he's not all there kind of thing. And then you show him this book and then he gets riled up and then you tell him, oh, actually, coincidentally, this guy's coming to visit, this particular bookshop or whatever it was. So it can happen, man. But listen, inshallah, guys, I just want to get your final thoughts really on the topics you discussed, and then we'll sort of bring the podcast to a close. So Afi, I'll start with you, bro. Any final thoughts, or you good?
Yeah, no, Jazakallah. I think just linking both the topics, really, I think we've highlighted a lot that there's a lot of emotion there from Muslims, which is good. And Muslims generally understand as well that Islam is a complete way of life, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us our solutions, right? Which seems to be a constant theme. And we're here, right? We're not bloody geniuses, right? We're just normal people. Take Rush out the equation and we can't even speak English properly, right? That's just the level that we're at. But what we have done is we've applied our thinking to the reality, and we've understood what Islam is, and we've understood that actually when we have these emotions, we need to seek the satisfaction of these emotions from Islam. And that's what I would just urge Muslims there. You've got the mind, you understand what Islam is, you've got good emotions for Islam as well. Just link them together, make sure your thinking and your emotions are in line, and we will be you will see the progress that this ummah will make in no time.
MashaAllah. No, Jazakallah khair for that. Rash, any final thoughts, bro?
Only very short ones this time. Normally my final points are a bit too long, I think. But yeah, no, firstly, thanks, Afi, for your kind comments. But yeah, no, I think what's important on the Palestine issue especially is that we start to make an effort to study what's going on politically over there, because otherwise sometimes it just seems that, oh, it's the same. Oh, there's another attack. You know, there's a bombing going on. Our brothers have been killed. Oh, send aid. But each time there's political agenda behind it. There's policies behind it. So I think just that little short advice for me is that make sure you study what's going on. On top of that, the other things that are going on about this whole destroying of Al-Aqsa compound and building the Temple of Solomon and all of that kind of stuff, that is in the background as well. It's not just a political thing. They also managed to get their people on side because they're pushing that as well. As a Zionist entity, there's that theological element to it as well. And that's happening with the backing of these Western nations. And it's very dangerous. So I think that's something we should study as well, because I've been reading a few articles about that recently. And a lot of the stuff they use to justify that this is the place where the Solomon's temple Solomon's temple was, most of it's all bogus. There's no kind of authentic archaeological factual information about it. So getting some of that knowledge will help us, that even if we're speaking to a non-Muslim who tries to say, oh, no, but they've got a claim to this land as well, and they want to do stuff theologically as well, you can disprove it. But if we don't actually study it, we can't disprove it. And then we kind of have to always be on the back foot. So those just two things, I think it's worth us, all of us as Muslims, just making sure we do a bit of study on both of those areas, just so we're more clued up.
No, Jazakallah khair, bro, for that. And yeah, I mean, I think you guys have summed it up nicely anyway. So yeah, Jazakallah khair for coming on. And I hope, our listeners have benefited from this show. And yeah, I mean, we'll try to do this a bit more regular. I think a lot's happening. A lot has happened which we didn't cover. Whether it's, loads is happening. If I start talking about it, we'll just keep going. But inshallah, let's try to do these regularly, inshallah. And for everyone listening and watching, as you know, you can get this podcast on the Islamic Jihads podcast website, and also on the Path to Revival YouTube channel. As you could tell, it's been a while I've even said that, so it's a bit rusty there. But yeah, inshallah, hopefully if you benefit, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your family and friends. And the advice that the brothers have left us with is really important for myself, even for them, and for everyone listening, that we need to really take time out to comprehend the situation, what's happening, because it definitely affects us. And if we don't think it affects us in this life, then, just be sure that we will be questioning about this in the next life when it really matters. So, whilst we're here, whilst we have an opportunity, we should try to prepare in the best way possible. On that note, until the next one, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.